I still remember the chill that ran down my spine the moment I realized what I was hearing. My mother's voice, faint and crackling through the phone speaker. She hadn't meant to call me, and she certainly didn't know I was on the line. My heart pounded, confused at first. Maybe this was a pocket dial, nothing more. But then the words started to come into focus, cutting sharp as blades. I heard my name mentioned with a sneer, and then laughter. My brothers, my cousins, even my mother's. They were talking about me, mocking me as if I were some fool they'd lured into a trap. The people I believed I was tirelessly supporting, pouring my energy into, were tearing me down. I steadied myself in the driver's seat of my car, phone pressed to my ear, not daring to breathe. I just finished a draining day at the office, already nursing the wounds from a humiliating confrontation with my boss. And now this. Their words spilled out unfiltered, each insult a punch to the gut, revealing a side of my family I had never wanted to admit existed. In that moment, realization hit me like a tidal wave. I had been living a lie, and they were the ones who'd created it. It wasn't always this way. Growing up, I was the daughter who aimed high. My grades were top-notch, my teachers praised me, and everyone in the neighborhood would pat my head and say she's destined for something big. My family reveled in my achievements, wearing my successes like badges of honor. They bragged to neighbors and extended relatives about how I'd graduate from a good college and land a prestigious job. I'd always believed their pride was genuine, an unbreakable bond that tied us together. When I became the first in our family to get a degree, I thought we were all celebrating as one. Yet, beneath the surface, there were whispers, small hints that my relatives' pride might have been tainted by envy, that their applause could turn into resentful murmurs the second I left the room. Still, I dismissed those feelings. My mother had always smiled so lovingly, telling everyone I was their beacon of hope. My brother patted my back with an awkward grin whenever I came home for the holidays. My cousin teased me about how I'd forget them all when I was rich and fancy. But I never forgot them. I worked tirelessly and paid for everything I could, just to prove I was still one of them. Things shifted when I landed my first corporate job in the city, far away from our small town. Suddenly, I was making more money than anyone else in my immediate family had ever seen. My phone lit up with urgent calls from my mom to help with her rent, from my brother who needed to cover unexpected expenses, from my aunt who was behind on her insurance payments. I didn't blink an eye as I poured my savings into helping them, believing it was my duty. They had, after all, supported me in their own way throughout my life. Or so I told myself. Every time I wired money or took on a debt so they wouldn't have to, my heart filled with a sense of purpose. I told myself I was giving back, that I was the gracious success story paying it forward. But after a while, I noticed a shift in their tone, subtle yet persistent. Gratitude took a backseat to expectation. Each favor led to another, bigger favor. The thanks grew stale, replaced by a sort of dismissive acceptance that I would always be there to foot the bill. I thought I was forging stronger bonds, but it turned out I was merely fueling silent resentments. When I picked up my mother's accidental call that day, I caught them red-handed, bashing me while rejoicing in the idea that they had me wrapped around their collective finger. My mother's voice was the most damning of all. "She acts like she's better than us," she said in this hissing tone I'd never heard directed at me before. My brother jumped in with his usual sarcastic drawl, saying something like, "Yeah, let her keep thinking we like her. As long as she keeps paying those bills, I'm good." The laughter that followed turned my stomach. A wave of numbness spread through my body, and for a moment, I was so stunned I forgot to breathe. This was the same family I had been tirelessly supporting, the same people whose needs I'd placed above my own. While my boss had been demeaning me at work, my own family was treating me like a convenient ATM. The betrayal cut deeper than any workplace slight could, precisely because it was unexpected yet not entirely surprising. It was a moment of jarring clarity, forcing me to see what had been in front of me all along. They didn't truly appreciate me, they just appreciated my money. The timing of the call was almost too perfect in its cruelty. Minutes earlier, I had been sitting in my car, tears burning at the corners of my eyes after the worst meeting of my career. Jeff, my arrogant and conniving boss, had just shredded my confidence in a public forum. He was the kind of boss who strutted around with an air of false bravado, stealing ideas and taking credit for work he didn't do. I'd spent months toiling away on a high-stakes project that could potentially put our division on the map. But in that fateful meeting, Jeff systematically dismantled my credibility. He pinned every delay, most of which were due to his own incompetence, on me. He claimed it was his brainchild from the start, reducing me to a mere foot soldier who lacked leadership abilities. In front of the entire team, he left me exposed and humiliated. And so I retreated to my car, my safe haven in the company parking lot, to release a few tears and gather myself before heading home. That was when my phone buzzed, and my mother's name flashed across the screen. I thought it might be a comforting voice in a time of crisis. Instead, it was the final nail in a coffin of disillusionment. Hearing their insults at my lowest merged into a brutal epiphany: betrayal at home and at work. On one side, I was a corporate underling, humiliated by a boss who stole my credit. On the other, I was a daughter and sister whose family saw me only as a wallet. That heartbreak tightened my chest, but it soon morphed into a cold, clear anger. These weren't isolated acts of deceit. I'd been blind to how deeply they ran. I wanted to confront them outright, throw my phone on the table, and demand they repeat every word. But beneath that fury, a calmer voice told me to wait, to plan. That night, I isolated myself in my cramped apartment, surveying the boxes of documents, emails, and the framed family photo that now felt like a cruel joke. How long had they been using me? Had anyone truly cared for me? Or was it always about my bank account? Anger evolved into resolve. If Jeff believed he could diminish my accomplishments and my family saw me as an endless ATM, they'd learn I was done playing the victim. I'd strike back with precision, aiming for a victory that was undeniably mine. In the days that followed, I kept a calm facade at work, quietly collecting every file, email, and data log that proved Jeff's manipulations. My heart pounded whenever I copied sensitive documents, but each new piece of evidence strengthened my resolve. I knew I couldn't confront him outright, so I let him bask in arrogance while I amassed the truth. Simultaneously, I made a terrifying yet freeing choice at home. I cut off the money flow. No more covering my brother's temporary bills, no more paying my mother's rent, no more rescuing my aunt's insurance lapses. If they cared, they'd check on me without expecting cash. Days passed, then weeks, and none of them called. My brother's lone response was a veiled jab on social media about forgetting one's roots. It stung, but it also revealed how much our bond had relied on my wallet. As I browsed job boards and contacted old friends, a new power settled over me. If Jeff and my family wanted a pawn, they were about to learn I could master the game on my own terms. When the day of the interview arrived, my nerves were on edge, but I channeled every negative emotion into a poised demeanor. The hiring panel was composed of 3 people: a senior VP, a department head, and an HR representative. They asked me probing questions about how I handled conflict, how I motivated teams, and how I dealt with high-pressure deadlines. I gave concise, confident answers, peppering in enough detail to highlight my competence without appearing boastful. What I didn't say outright was that I'd essentially carried a multi-million-dollar project on my shoulders while my boss siphoned off credit. I let my portfolio speak for itself. The real game changer came when they asked me to provide examples of leadership under adversity. Quietly, yet firmly, I recounted the meticulous steps I'd taken to rescue a failing project, without naming names. I mentioned how I navigated office politics to keep morale high and ensure deliverables were met. They listened, scribbled notes, and nodded. By the end of our meeting, I felt an electricity in the air. They saw in me not just a capable manager, but someone who could lead strategic initiatives. I walked out with my head held high, sensing that my life might be on the brink of a monumental change. In the meantime, at work, Jeff seemed oblivious to the storm brewing. He strutted around, gloating about the next phase of his project, never once suspecting that I had meticulously documented every email chain and internal memo that would dismantle his version of events. Our interactions were polite but distant. When he cracked jokes at my expense in meetings, I smiled thinly, refusing to let him see how his words might affect me. Inside, I was brimming with a newfound sense of control. I recognized that Jeff's weapon was his arrogance. He believed that I was too meek to fight back, that I'd continue to slog away while he took the accolades. This gave me a critical advantage, the element of surprise. While I wrapped up the final project tasks and prepared a smooth handover, I also made sure to leave digital breadcrumbs that would lead any discerning eye straight to the truth. My daily routine involved ensuring that all the files I had were backed up externally, while carefully extracting anything personal or incriminating I'd left on company servers. I wasn't just planning to leave. I was planning to detonate a factual bomb that would reveal Jeff's corruption and secure my own vindication. Exactly 2 weeks after my interview, I received the call from the new company's HR. They offered me the directorial position, complete with a salary that nearly doubled what I currently made, stock options, and a clear path to a VP role if I performed well. I felt simultaneously elated and vindicated. This was more than just a professional upgrade. It was the lifeline I needed to extract myself from a toxic work environment. After I accepted the offer, calmly, with all the business-like composure I could muster, I went home and allowed myself a moment to scream in joy. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a surge of genuine optimism. Everything I'd endured, the long hours, the betrayal by my boss, the heartbreak from my family, was fueling this moment of triumph. Then I put on my game face and handed in my 2-week notice to HR the next day. Word spread quickly through the office, though Jeff barely batted an eye. He didn't congratulate me, didn't even ask where I was going. Perhaps he was too self-absorbed to care, or maybe he thought my departure would cement his legacy on the project. Either way, I kept my lips sealed about my new position, biding my time. My final weeks at the company were a master class in measured composure. People from different teams, those who hadn't fallen under Jeff's sway, approached me with kind words, saying they'd miss working with me. Some confided their frustration with Jeff's leadership style, or lack thereof. I offered sympathetic nods, but shared nothing of my forthcoming plan. In my last few days, I finalized any pending tasks, ensuring that the handover documentation was crystal clear. I was determined to leave no reason for anyone to claim I'd been anything but professional. When my final day arrived, I left the office quietly. There was no farewell party organized by Jeff, no official recognition. It was just me packing my box of personal items and slipping away. As I walked out of the building one last time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But the real showdown was still ahead. I might have physically left, but my next role would place me in a position of oversight. My new company had a significant partnership with Jeff's firm, and I would be the liaison responsible for ensuring compliance and efficiency on joint projects. In other words, the time for my carefully laid trap to spring was fast approaching. As soon as I settled into my new role, I wasted no time learning the ropes. The team I managed was savvy and driven, and the corporate culture felt like a breath of fresh air compared to what I'd left behind. Yet, in the back of my mind, I still carried the sting of betrayal, both from my boss and from my own family. During my lunch breaks, I sometimes scrolled through my phone, noting the silence from my relatives. Occasionally, my mother would send a half-hearted text like, "How are you?" or "We miss you," but nothing about the fact that I'd cut them off financially. It was as though they were testing the waters, unsure how to manipulate me back into their clutches. I responded politely, but kept my guard up. My main focus was learning every detail of the partnership with my old company. After about a month, my new boss informed me that we'd be conducting a routine compliance and performance review with them. Since I had first-hand experience on the project, I was put in charge. My heart fluttered with a blend of excitement and nerves. This was it, the chance to reveal the truth about Jeff's underhanded ways in a professional, impartial setting. Vengeance was near, but it would come clothed in facts and data, not spite. When the compliance review ended, a stark silence filled the virtual room. The executives on Jeff's side looked mortified, while he stammered about misunderstandings and undue pressure. But facts didn't lie. My new boss gave them 2 weeks to address the compliance issues, then ended the call with a nod in my direction. I allowed myself a rare, quiet smile. Within days, the fallout began. Multiple directors were fired, and Jeff was unmasked as the chief culprit behind budget mismanagement. He was escorted out, laptop seized, and reputation shattered. Some whispered that employees clapped as he left, but I didn't need confirmation to feel my triumph. I kept my composure at my new job, accepting private congratulations, but never gloating. The truth had finally been laid bare, and I'd proven myself in a role that valued my expertise. Then, just as the dust settled, my family reemerged. My mother messaged me about my brother's eviction, my aunt about another insurance lapse, and even my cousin claimed a sudden crisis. Their words dripped with guilt-tripping, but I read them with a detachment I hadn't known I possessed. It was clear they'd heard about my higher pay. They wanted to test if I was still their bottomless source of rescue. I typed a single response to my mother, referencing the phone call I'd overheard. "Mom, I know exactly how you all feel about me. I won't be sending any more money, at least not until I see genuine remorse." The words felt surreal as I wrote them. In another life, I would have rushed to their aid, money in hand, desperate to maintain the illusion of familial unity. But that life was gone. I had to protect myself now. My mother responded with a flurry of texts, each more desperate than the last, pleas for forgiveness, apologies that sounded half-sincere at best, and then pivoting to scolding me for turning my back on my own blood. But none of these messages contained a real, heartfelt admission of their wrongdoing. No acknowledgement that they'd used me or lied about respecting me. My brother tried a similar tactic, alternating between apologizing and mocking me for my corporate lifestyle. It was clear that they were unwilling to confront the depth of the betrayal. They just wanted the money. So I kept my silence. Despite the pang of hurt still lodged in my chest, I refused to cave. This was my stand. I was done being their ATM. During this emotional standoff, I also found myself reflecting on what true family and support should look like. I had friends, like Clarissa, who'd come through for me in more profound ways than my own family ever did. The heartbreak I felt wasn't simply because they'd betrayed me, but because I realized they never even bothered to know me beyond my financial usefulness. They didn't care about my aspirations, my struggles at work, or the dreams I had for the future. They only cared about what I could provide. As the days turned into weeks, my mother and brother's messages grew less frequent. I imagined them realizing that the well had truly run dry. Occasionally, I'd get a spiteful text or a passive-aggressive social media post, but I ignored it all. Each time, it stung a little less. I poured my energy into my new job, forging connections with people who respected my skills and valued my input. My apartment, once a cramped and dingy spot I barely had time to maintain, became my sanctuary. I bought a new couch, hung up fresh art, and found myself smiling when I returned home. For the first time, I was living for me, not for someone else's demands. One afternoon, I found myself in a familiar situation at work, a high-stakes project needing immediate turnaround. My new team looked to me for guidance, and I realized I was no longer the anxious employee tiptoeing around a domineering boss. Now I was the leader, the one in charge. The realization filled me with a quiet confidence. I drew on all the lessons I'd learned, how to manage timelines, juggle budgets, and navigate tricky interpersonal dynamics. The project went off smoothly, and even the upper management praised our execution. In that moment, I felt like I'd finally claimed my rightful place in the corporate world. I was no longer overshadowed by someone else's ego or fighting for scraps of recognition. My accomplishments were my own, recognized by a team that genuinely appreciated my contributions. And with each success, I felt my anger and pain over the past diminish, replaced by a sense of purpose. I wasn't just proving something to Jeff or my family anymore. I was proving it to myself. I was capable. I was worthy. And I refused to let their betrayals define me. Life continued in this balanced, almost serene state until one evening my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Something in my gut told me to answer. On the other end was my mother, calling from a borrowed phone. Her voice was shaky, and she sounded at the edge of tears. "We're really struggling," she said. "Your brother got evicted, and I can't keep the lights on. We didn't mean what we said. You know we love you, right?" I felt a swell of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to cave, to be the good daughter who saves the day. But I forced myself to remember the sting of that accidental call, the mocking laughter, and how none of them had bothered to check on me after my worst day at work. I thought of how they expected me to sacrifice my well-being at the snap of their fingers. So I steadied myself, took a deep breath, and asked her one question. "Do you understand why I stopped helping?" She fell silent for a few seconds before mumbling something about me being oversensitive. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't accountability. It was just a feeble attempt to guilt me back into submission. So I told her I needed real honesty and remorse before I'd even consider helping again. Then I hung up. After that phone call, I went through a period of mourning for the family dynamic I'd believed in for so long. I realized that the life I had was markedly better without their constant demands and emotional blackmail. Yet, a nagging voice in my mind reminded me that these were still the people who'd raised me, who'd been part of my life story since day one. The conflict between wanting to uphold some sense of family loyalty and protecting my well-being gnawed at me day after day. I turned to therapy, at first hesitantly, but my therapist gave me a space to untangle these emotions, assuring me that cutting off toxic relationships, even if they're with family, sometimes is the healthiest choice. She reminded me that boundaries are not walls, but doors that only open to those who respect them. I learned to separate genuine need from manipulative tactics. Yes, my family might have financial struggles, but they also needed to learn to stand on their own feet and respect me as an individual, not just as a resource. By the time I finished a few sessions, I felt more certain than ever. I could be compassionate, but compassion doesn't equate to being a doormat. As I emerged from this emotional crucible, I found a new stride in both my personal and professional life. I took on more responsibilities at work, and even volunteered to mentor a junior associate who reminded me of my younger self. Eager, idealistic, and sometimes too trusting. The sense of fulfillment I got from guiding someone else, from empowering them to grow, was transformative. I wasn't just climbing the corporate ladder, I was lifting others alongside me. Meanwhile, the calls and messages from my family slowed to a trickle, probably because they realized their efforts at manipulation were failing. My mother sent me a couple of holiday greetings, and I responded politely but kept the conversation brief. My aunt tried once more to guilt-trip me into paying for her medication, but I directed her to a local community health program that offered low-cost options. In each interaction, I maintained my newly fortified boundaries. And with each day that passed, I felt lighter, stronger, and more in control of my own destiny. The cinematic climax of my revenge exposing Jeff had already come and gone, but the real reward was the quiet empowerment that seeped into every corner of my life. Finally, one evening, as I sat in my new apartment with a panoramic view of the city lights, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I thought about the day my mom butt dialed me. The day I learned that the people I loved had no real love for me, only a warped sense of entitlement. I thought about Jeff, the man who had tried to suffocate my career to elevate his own, and how I'd taken him down not through loud confrontation, but through quiet, strategic diligence. The vengeance I'd exacted was both professional and personal, but it wasn't about destroying lives. It was about reclaiming my own. As I sipped my tea, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. My bank account was no longer hemorrhaging to prop up those who despised me. My workplace environment was supportive, respectful, and eager for my contributions. My emotional well-being, though scarred, was on the mend. In that stillness, I realized that I had done more than simply survive a betrayal. I had thrived despite it. I was no longer the naive girl who believed that love and duty were reasons to let herself be taken advantage of. I found myself resuming occasional contact with my mother on my own terms. We had phone conversations where I set clear boundaries. I told her I loved her, but wouldn't allow her or anyone else to belittle me or exploit my kindness again. Surprisingly, she grew quieter, maybe beginning to realize that the old dynamic was gone for good. My brother, on the other hand, refused to speak to me unless I agreed to cover his rent. I let that be his choice, refusing to bend. Though it hurt to see him spiral in anger, I reminded myself that this was part of the growing pains of establishing a healthier relationship, if it could ever be healthy at all. My aunt occasionally reached out to say she missed me, but she, too, laced her messages with subtle jabs about my financial obligations to family. With each message, I felt more and more at peace with my decision. Even though their responses confirmed our bond might never be truly mended, I found solace in living my own truth. I couldn't force them to change, but I could stand firmly in my own self-worth. One evening, I sat in my new apartment with its breathtaking city view, reflecting on how far I'd come. I revisited the moment my mom butt-dialed me, the day I learned that the people I cared for saw me not with love but entitlement. Then I pictured Jeff, who tried to suffocate my career and steal my achievements. I had defeated them both, not through vicious retaliation, but through calm, calculated strategy that reclaimed my life. My bank account was no longer drained by those who mocked me, and my new workplace respected my voice. Although my heart was scarred, I'd emerged stronger. In the weeks that followed, I began contacting my mother again, carefully stating my boundaries. I told her I loved her, but wouldn't allow belittling or exploitation anymore. She seemed shaken, sensing a permanent shift. My brother, however, refused to speak unless I covered his rent, so I let him remain silent. My aunt claimed she missed me, but still dropped hints about my duties to the family. With each guarded interaction, I felt increasingly certain I'd made the right choice. Though our bond might never fully mend, I'd chosen self-respect over manipulation. Standing firm in my truth, I found a peace that had long eluded me. Reflecting on it all, I see that my revenge wasn't driven by cruelty. It was about validation and reclaiming my power. Toppling Jeff proved my professional worth, while severing my family's financial dependence showed me I wasn't just a resource. Yes, I yearn for a true family bond, but I accept some bridges remain broken until both sides commit to rebuilding. The peace I found didn't arise from anyone's suffering, but from taking charge of my life without losing my compassion. Now I stand on my apartment balcony, gazing at the glittering skyline, surrounded by tokens of achievement, awards, thank you notes, a cherished letter from a grateful client. I'm far from the quivering woman who once wept alone in her car. My path was riddled with heartbreak and betrayal, yet each setback became a stepping stone toward a quiet, precise vengeance that toppled a domineering boss and shook a family's complacency. In that journey, I learned a truth. The people who hurt us most are often those we trust to protect us. But that pain can spark a transformation so profound that we emerge stronger, unafraid to insist on what we deserve. For that, I have no regrets. As I close this chapter, I reflect on the day my mom accidentally called me and unleashed a torrent of truth that changed everything. I remember gripping my phone, hearing her mocking tone, my brother's dismissive quips, and the echo of laughter that tore down every illusion I'd built. That moment felt like a knife to the heart, but it was also the spark that ignited the fire in me. From that ember of betrayal, a blaze of transformation took hold, fueling a strategy that would see me rise above two toxic environments. I understand now that living well, authentically, with self-respect and integrity is the most potent victory of all. No matter how many insults they hurled or how many times Jeff tried to undercut me, I walked away not just intact, but elevated. The final word rests with me, in my own story, where I dictate the terms. It's not about leaving a wreckage behind, it's about forging a new path forward. I can't control whether my family changes, but I can control who I become. And that woman, standing tall today, owes it all to the day she overheard the bitter truth and decided she deserved better. So this is where I stand, triumphant yet cautious, aware of my own resilience, but also of the fragility of trust. I found my vindication in a methodical, meticulous unraveling of deceit, both at work and at home. My revenge was never about petty satisfaction. It was about exposing truths and forcing accountability. It was about ensuring I didn't remain the victim of someone else's narrative. Along the way, I discovered depths of strength I never knew I had. I navigated corporate landmines with precision, ascended to a position that commands respect, and established boundaries that finally protect my emotional well-being. Yes, the path was laced with sorrow and betrayal, but it led me to the greatest victory I could imagine. A life lived on my own terms. As I type these final words, the city lights twinkle outside my window, reminding me that even in the darkness, there's always a glimmer of hope. And for anyone reading or hearing my story, let this be the takeaway. You have the power to transform heartbreak into resolve, betrayal into liberation, and cruelty into a catalyst for your own ascension. That, above all else, is what I'll carry with me.